This class is about successful vegetable gardening in times of drought. Why are we considering this as a topic? The Northwest is experiencing longer and hotter summer drought. This trend is predicted to continue. This is putting stress on water resources. Already last year, farmers using irrigation were reduced in some areas and had to turn off their irrigation in June. Eventually, municipalities may have to restrict outside water use. So we need to start thinking about how we conserve water and use less in our gardens at this time. Even people on wells may experience loss of water and have to reduce their use. Our objectives are to gain some understanding of a new dry farming research project at Oregon State University's Extension Small Farms program. Learn techniques for the efficient use of garden irrigation water, reducing the loss of soil moisture. Identifying 3 actions to reduce garden water use, and learn resources to research drought-tolerant vegetable varieties. The dry farming research project started at Oregon State University in 2015. They set up field trials at their farm to study production of crops like potatoes, melons, shell beans, flour corn, tomatoes, and zucchini without added irrigation. Dry farmers also are setting up field trials to do this study. So dry farming in this study refers to organic vegetable production that relies on soil moisture from the rainy season. They do not irrigate during the dry summer months. It's most successful if done in areas with 20 inches or more of rainfall and deep soil. Techniques to preserve soil moisture during the long dry season include site selection, soil preparation, planting timing and technique, surface protection, and the use of drought-tolerant vegetable varieties. We will discuss some of these techniques for use in our home gardens. OSU's farm in Corvallis and commercial dry farmers are field testing a variety of vegetables, pooling their production data, their quality information, and publishing their results to benefit other dry farmers. So what can home gardeners do? You can begin by evaluating your site. Not all soil is the same, as this photograph indicates. The soil on the left is very dark and rich in organic matter. The soil on the right has very little organic matter. The soil on the left would be much more successful in growing vegetables in drought because organic matter is the key component to holding soil moisture. You can go online and look up a web soil survey to determine the specific nature of your garden area. You can also look at your site by evaluating where plants seem to grow the longest. If you have a site where blackberry plants are growing and they are green all summer, that's indicative of that site having more moisture than other areas. So you may want to consider situating your garden in areas that seem to retain moisture longer. Is your garden area drying out in the summer? Are there large cracks formed because of summer heat? You might want to consider planting something to shade your garden area or moving it to a site that is less exposed. If you have exposure to wind, that's a factor to consider. Wind can dry out soil moisture from 20 to 40%. So you may plant larger plants to provide windbreaks or put up some mechanical form of a windbreak. Optimally, you need to start preparing your garden soil in the fall. Add organic matter to improve the water holding capacity. Materials you can add are leaves, weed-free grass clippings that are free from chemicals, commercial or homemade compost, or other organic materials. Another option to add organic material to your garden is to use cover crops. This photograph shows 3 different kinds: red and white clover and phacelia. Both of these crops are very good for bees, as well as adding organic material to your garden. One of the benefits of growing clover is that it's deep-rooted. When it's cut off in the spring and the roots decompose, it forms channels down into your soil to allow moisture to penetrate deeply and to allow plants to grow deeply. Here's an example of some materials you can use for holding moisture. Homemade compost on the left, straw. So leaves are our friends. Don't bundle them and put them into plastic bags to be hauled off your property. Put them in containers, compost them, or spread them over your garden bed to protect it from the winter rains. In addition to providing that organic matter to hold the soil moisture, you want to be able to manage your water resources very carefully. One of the best and most efficient systems for watering a garden is to use timers on a drip irrigation system. This is a 4-zone timer. It looks complex, but they're quite easy to use. The benefit of this system is that you can plant your different vegetables in zones, grouping the ones that require more water in one zone and less water in other zones. That way, you're maximizing utilization of water and minimizing waste. It's also important to set the timing on your irrigation system to water early in the morning before the soil and the air warm up. Drip irrigation has the advantage of putting water right at the base of your plants, so you're not watering areas to enhance weed growth. Lots of drip irrigation options are available. This is a very simple yet somewhat labor-intensive system. If you had a few plants, you could use a system like this. However, there's a system that Steve Solomon recommends using a 5-gallon bucket. It's inexpensive and it's very easy to do. His philosophy about drought-tolerant gardening is that oftentimes the plants run out of nutrients rather than moisture because there is low moisture in the soil where they're growing, and it doesn't allow the nutrients to be taken up by the plants. So he has what he calls fertigation system. He takes a 5-gallon bucket, fills it with water, adds soluble fertilizer, puts a small hole in the bottom of the bucket, and moves that from plant to plant. If you have a large planting, you could leave it in one area and move it to another. That system would be useful if you have plants that are outside your drip system. Timing is critical if you're going to start planting early. You need to check your soil temperature in your garden. It's recommended that you take readings at 9 o'clock in the morning for 7 days and average those readings to determine what the actual garden soil temperature is. You also want to check soil moisture to see if it's early enough to be worked, but not too early. Take a handful of soil and squeeze it. If it crumbles easily, it's okay to start working. If it stays in a ball, it's too wet. You will disturb the soil structure, causing constriction, reduction of air spaces in the soil, which inhibits your plant growth. You can start your seeds indoors for early planting using a simple tray on a windowsill. Cold frames are useful outside. You can start trays of seeds or keep your transplants warm. Small greenhouses are good to start transplants and protect your plants before it's warm enough to put them out in the garden bed. Planting short season early vegetables is another way to use your garden before the soil warms up and gets too hot. Vegetable varieties like peas, radishes, chard, leafy greens are excellent things to put in early. Keeping your plants warm after you've put them in the ground can be done with inexpensive methods like using gallon milk jugs with the bottoms cut out to protect the plants from cool night temperatures. Using commercial products like red and black plastic around your plants also helps keep your plants warm. Floating row cover is another way to keep those transplants warm while they're in the ground, and walls of water also extends the warm period through the evening. Planting techniques to improve growth in drought conditions include pre-soaking large seeds like beans and corn. This can be done the night before you want to put them in the ground. It speeds their germination. Pressing soil around transplants and seeds is believed to be effective in increasing the capillary action, bringing the soil moisture to the surface where the seeds can access it. Using mulch around plants helps cool the soil and reduces the evaporation. However, you want to make sure you put down slug bait before you put the mulch on your plants. You also want to make sure your plants are growing before you put the mulch down. You've warmed up your soil to plant early, and you want to keep those plants growing before you mulch around them to keep the soil moisture from evaporating. You want to keep the beds weed-free to reduce the competition for moisture and nutrients. You can also plant in blocks rather than rows. This allows the leaves of your plants to shade the soil, again, reducing moisture evaporation. Examples like planting the three sisters together, corn, beans, and squash, allow the beans to crawl up the corn stalk while the giant squash leaves shade the ground. Planting close together in mixed plantings is another technique for reducing soil evaporation. If you want to try a dry farm or dry farm a couple of vegetables as a field trial, they suggest planting the vegetables twice as far apart as you normally would. This allows the plant roots to extend and get enough moisture without competing with their neighboring vegetables. These are examples of protecting your soil surface with organic mulch. You want to use weed-free mulch. You want to use chemically free grass clippings, wheat straw, or garden compost. Another technique suggested is compressing a seed bed before you put your seeds in a furrow. You can use a board to do this, making the furrow and allowing space to sprinkle the seeds down through the center. Again, they believe it brings the water to the surface where the seeds can access it. Planting in blocks, you can see the leaves of these plants are shading the soil. This is an example of planting close together in a mixed planting. The artichoke leaves are shading some of the more tender plants. Other options to protect the soil surface include dust mulch. I'll speak more about that in a minute. Cardboard, newspaper, and burlap bags are often available free and effective in covering your soil. Commercially available black and red plastic is also useful. Dust mulch system has been used by dry farmers for years. It hasn't been scientifically tested, but they believe it's an effective means for reducing soil moisture evaporation. They keep the area weed-free around their plants. They keep the top 2 inches of soil fluffy. They believe the fluffiness of the soil fills in cracks that are formed by intense summer heat. They believe that reduces evaporation. Also, dry farmers need to use a system that doesn't require a lot of inputs and a lot of labor. They can't afford the labor or the cost of putting down organic mulches, so they've developed that system. They also use commercially available ground cover like black and red plastic. It's important to choose drought-tolerant varieties if you want to be successful using less water. Often heirloom varieties fit into this category because they were developed before irrigation was available. Buying from local seed companies is another way to ensure that the varieties you're growing are going to produce in our climate. Planting more vining crops like melons, cucumbers, squash, peas, and shell beans is another way of being successful in producing things during the dry season. However, green beans are not on this list because they do require more water and irrigation to be successful. You can also review the literature on dry farming and try some of the recommended varieties. Some of the varieties that were tested in the dry farm trials from 2015 to 2019 include these three winter squashes: North Candy Roaster, Stella Blue, and Hidatsa. These produced well for dry farmers, but you need to understand that dry farmed vegetables without supplemental irrigation often are 25 to 50% less productive than irrigated varieties. However, dry farmers believe that the quality of the produce is better. The storage quality of these winter squash was excellent, whereas if you're irrigating them, sometimes they can't be stored as long. They also field trialed different types of zucchini, a dark star at the top, Costata Romanesco, and Goldini. These three were quite productive in a dry farm setting. I have produced dark star myself. It's an excellent zucchini. It holds up in cooking. One of the side benefits is that it isn't quite as productive as an irrigated zucchini, and that may be an advantage. Dry farm tomatoes that have been successful include the Dirty Girl hybrid, which is an F2 hybrid of Early Girl. The top photograph is a picture of some available at a local farmer's market. The photograph on the right is Early Girl. It's an often grown tomato in this region. It did well without supplemental irrigation. And also Coeur de Butte, which is an heirloom paste type tomato, was very productive. It's actually quite a juicy tomato and can be used as a slicing tomato in addition to making tomato sauce. So what's important to remember? Feed your soil lots of organic matter. 5 to 7% is a content that is recommended. Adding 2 to 5 inches of organic matter every year to your garden is suggested. Conserve water by using drip irrigation, hand watering, and using timers. Mulching your garden to prevent the loss of soil moisture. Keeping your garden weed-free. And choosing drought-tolerant varieties of vegetables. Of course, you want to eat your vegetables as well.